In this video, we'll take a look at items that may possibly cause the phone not to successfully onboard to WebEx Calling. The first item to consider if you're running into issues onboarding the phone to WebEx Calling would be potentially firewall or other security device that may be interfering and not allowing the phone to onboard. A document to consider viewing is the port reference information for Cisco WebEx Calling. I will leave a link in the description below for this document. It goes over key items that are required as far as different TCP/UDP ports, including different subnets on internet if the firewall or other security device is blocking, and it has very strict rules which specific subnets and internet they need to be considered to be whitelisted or permitted, if you will. This document does get updated from time to time. It is very detailed, so it may take an extended period of time to review the information. But if you notice, it covers different source ports, protocols, TCP/UDP, destination addresses, destination ports, and different type of notes. And as we go towards the bottom of the document, there's also more general statements as far as what domains need to be whitelisted. And for example, this specific item right here is for WebEx Aware Services. And then this also talks about domains and URLs for WebEx Calling services. So if you notice, there's quite a long list of different domains. And then the other thing that I briefly mentioned is the document does get updated from time to time. So you can take a look at the document revision history and see when it was last updated. So this document was updated fairly recently. Okay, the next item that might cause issues for onboarding the phone is if the phone has older 3PCC firmware. As the recording of this video currently, typically what I find is if the firmware of the phone is at least 11.3.3 MPP or above, typically the onboarding should be smooth, assuming you don't run into any of the issues that I'm reviewing at this point of time. If the firmware on the phone is below 11.3.3 MPP, there is an increased risk that you may see issues. So definitely consider, if the phone is below 11.3.3 firmware, consider updating the phone. There are some tools that are offered to make the upgrading from older MPP firmware to newer MPP firmware much easier. So probably a good starting point would be going to the upgrade.cisco.com site. Bottom left side, there's an upgrade MPP firmware. They'll get you to this page. And as long as the phone has a minimum version of 11.0.0 MPP firmware, then you can use the upgrader site and it will upgrade the phone to 11.3.7 MPP firmware. And basically this shows you how to determine the IP address of your phone right here. And then once you log into the phone's web GUI, basically you're going to go under voice provisioning, profile rule. You're going to copy this rule right here, and then you're going to save and wait for the phone to reboot. This will typically take a couple minutes. I would say 3, 4, 5 minutes. And then once the phone reboots, it'll have the new firmware, the 11.3.7 firmware. If you have a large fleet of phones, you can also use the bulk upgrade method, which is using DHCP option 160 and then pointing to this site. And then this kind of talks about a few other items here. Okay, so the next item, number 3, DHCP option 66 and or 160 is enabled on the network segment where the phone is located at. This may cause the 3PCC phone not to follow its pre-programmed logic of onboarding to WebEx Calling. So if you recall a few moments ago that we actually made a change. So if we go to the bulk upgrade section of the document, You'll notice to do a bulk upgrade, they recommend doing DHCP 160 because when the phone pulls the DHCP address, this will instruct the phone to update the firmware. Once you've updated the firmware, you want to disable this. So in a situation where you are seeing issues with the phone onboarding to WebEx Calling, go ahead and check to see if DHCP option 66 and or 160 is enabled for that network segment, and then go ahead and, if possible, disable it, because this again can interfere with the phone successfully onboarding to WebEx Calling. Number 4, phone is not native 3PCC and does not have the needed migration license. So the methods of onboarding a phone via activation code and also via MAC address, and let's say you're doing no other steps in WebEx Control Hub, this assumes your phone is native 3PCC. So when you purchased it and you look at the part number, it'll say CP-8865-3PCC-K9. So the 3PCC indicates it's a MPP or 3PCC phone. If it is not a native 3PCC phone, you basically have two pathways you can take. One is you can use the firmware migration tool within WebEx Calling that generates virtual licensing. I have other videos you can watch on it. Also, there's information on the Cloud Upgrader site. So basically, if you go to the Enterprise to MPP section right here, this has a lot of very good detailed information for using the firmware migration tool within WebEx Calling, and there's a couple different methods depending on your situation as far as pathways of using the firmware migration task tool within WebEx Calling to generate the virtual licensing, and then depending if you're coming from CUCM or if you have a lot of phones in a staging facility, like a fleet of phones, and you want to use DHCP for bulk migration, or you're just doing a few phones for a proof of concept or lab, you can do manual. So in any case, you want to make sure if you're onboarding a phone that you understand what is the current state of the phone. Is it a native MPP phone? Was it a phone maybe that was migrated via classic licensing, which is actual license you buy, you apply to the phone? At that point of time, if the phone is native MPP and or has been migrated via classic licenses, you do not need to use the firmware migration tool to generate virtual licensing. And you want to basically go ahead and add the phone either via activation code through the device section of WebEx Calling or via MAC address through the device section of WebEx Calling. So just kind of keep an eye on that aspect, because if you have a fleet of phones, you may have variations as far as are the phones native 3PCC or are they phones that are actually enterprise and still need to have the firmware migration task run for them for the virtual licensing. Okay, this next one typically you may run into if you're deploying a higher end model phone like 8865, since that phone does have a Wi-Fi option. When you're migrating the phone and or when you're onboarding the phone to WebEx Calling, you always use the physical MAC address of the phone. You do not use the actual Wi-Fi MAC address. So just to repeat again, even if the end goal of the phone is to be used via Wi-Fi, the actual firmware migration process, onboarding process really needs to be done. One, it must be the physical MAC address, the RJ45 MAC address of the phone. And number two, you really want to avoid doing any type of firmware updates via Wi-Fi. Number one, it'll be slow. There can be hiccups and other problems. So two recommendations there. But in this specific case, the key item is that even if a phone is native MPP and you're going to be onboarding it to WebEx Calling, you must use the physical port MAC address, not the Wi-Fi MAC address. Otherwise, it will not work. Okay. Number 6, phone does not have proper internet access. Example, DNS queries are not resolved. So this kind of ties into item number 1 where it talked about firewall or other security devices. So when we're dealing with SIP protocol, and this applies to a lot of other protocols, and it's cloud-based, internet-based, it heavily relies on services like DNS. So if there's some type of URL filtering device, it can be part of the firewall, it can be a standalone, it can be something cloud-based. Definitely take a look at the logs of that device if the phone is not successful to onboard and or migrate for WebEx calling. And then the last item, item number 7, WebEx Calling organization does not have the proper licensing needed to support IP phones. So one thing to be aware with WebEx Calling, if you're going to be doing physical phones like the Cisco IP3 PCC phones, also known as MPP, then you basically need to have one of 2 licenses. For the user needs to have what is called a professional license. Otherwise, they won't be able to use a physical phone. So again, the user account the phone's going to be allocated to or registered to, that account must hold a professional license. The other option is a workspace. If the phone's being allocated to a workspace, then you need to make sure you have the workspace license for it. So these are some of the common items you may run into. Hopefully this helps you.